The film's action begins in the near future with the President of the United States addressing the nation. The President stumbles over his words as he announces that the Western forces, consisting of the states of Texas and California, which oppose the legitimate government, have suffered a crushing blow from the armed forces of the USA. On behalf of his electorate, he promises to reintegrate the residents of the rebellious states back into the unified country as soon as they overthrow their illegal separatist government and return to the bastion of democracy, the President of America. This speech is being listened to in a hotel by war photographer Lee Miller, who realizes that the president does not believe his own words. She takes a photo of the screen as another explosion thunders outside the window. The next day, the woman heads to the unrest-filled streets, dons a bright press vest, and captures everything she sees: the people's outrage, the crowd beatings, and police brutality. Here, Lee notices a young girl with a camera getting badly hit by a policeman and pulls her aside. The girl recognizes Lee, seeing her as an idol, and Lee hands her the press vest. Suddenly, an explosion rocks the crowd, killing many people. Lee immediately grabs her camera and takes horrifying shots. The girl joins her in capturing the scene. Later, Lee meets with her colleague, reporter Joel, and veteran journalist Sam. Lee and Joel discuss the situation and conclude that the Western forces will soon reach Washington. They plan to make their major report to photograph and interview the deposed ruler in besieged Washington before the Western forces soldiers capture and kill him. To do this, they must travel more than 1,000 kilometers and try not to die from the bullets of the radical citizens of the former United States. Sammy is categorically against this plan, as journalists are being killed in Washington. However, he skillfully charts a path through the Civil War-torn territory, showing that he too has considered such a trip. Exhausted, Lee heads to her room, but is called by the girl she saved earlier. Jessie admits she also wants to photograph the war and admires Lee's work, but Lee bids her farewell and leaves. Lying in the bathtub, Lee repeatedly recalls the horrific scenes of street killings, trying to dispel the visions. In the morning, she exits the hotel and sees Sammy and Jessie in the car shared with Joel. She is furious, but her partner explains that the girl dreams of becoming like her, so why not help? Lee reconciles and gets into the car. The team sets off. Soon they reach a massive car crash. The vehicles are shot up, smashed, and abandoned right on the road. It's only possible to guess what happened to their passengers. But Joel skillfully navigates through the horrific traffic jam. On the road, Sammy imitates an interview with the president, asking Joel questions. Does the politician think it was a good idea to disband the FBI? And asks for comments on the use of airstrikes against American citizens. Joel laughs, noting the sharpness of the questions, and concludes that they need to let the president finish speaking before he chokes on the rope. Soon the group arrives at a gas station where they are met by armed workers. While Joel refuels the car, Jessie and Lee step aside and see a couple of mutilated people hanging by their hands nearby. One of the gas station workers explains that these are looters. He asks Jessie to decide their fate, kill them immediately or let them suffer. The girl is paralyzed with shock, but Lee suddenly asks the worker to stand closer to the victims for a group photo. Later, driving away from the gas station, the shaken Jessie realizes she didn't take a single photo or object to the killings. Lee calmly reminds her that they don't ask questions. They record what's happening so others can ask questions later. If she wants to be a journalist, she must pull herself together. The group continues through destroyed cities filled with the bodies of the dead. In one of the squares, Lee asks to stop, leads Jessica to a wrecked helicopter, and orders her to photograph it. The girl complies and talks about her farmer father, who sits in his house pretending everything is fine. Jessica uses his film camera because a good digital one is hard to come by now. The girl apologizes for imposing herself, but Lee cuts her off. She doesn't care what the girl thinks or feels. She will just shoot. Jessica then asks if Lee will photograph her execution. Later, Lee confides in Sammy that she always wanted her photos to be a warning, but they have turned into mere albums. The old man reminds her of what she was like when she was young and asks her to be more attentive to the girl, knowing well what young reporters have to go through. Joel sums up that Lee has stopped believing in the power of journalism. Suddenly, gunfire erupts in the distance and the group decides to stop for the night. Joel talks with Jessie and advises her to stay here, where it's relatively safer, but the girl is stubborn and doesn't intend to hide from danger. The next morning, the team arrives in a town where a firefight is taking place. Joining one of the groups, they diligently capture the horror of the events. Jessie, forgetting everything, takes shot after shot while a soldier tries to save his wounded comrade by bandaging him. Then the journalists relentlessly follow a group of soldiers clearing a building. They capture every movement of the armed men, filming the execution of a wounded enemy and the faces of laughing soldiers indifferent to the surrounding chaos. Sammy calmly watches as the prisoners are executed, while Jesse equally indifferently films it on camera, and Lee turns away from the scene altogether. Later, they move on and soon arrive at a refugee camp where they can get food, but no tent. The people have set up camp on a former stadium, and the kids are happily playing with the sports equipment. Lee brings Jesse food and is surprised that she is developing film on the road. The girl admits she knows how Lee's journey as a journalist began. After all, her photos of the student massacre became known worldwide. The journalist tells her that her parents also sit on a farm, preferring not to react to the Civil War. Later, Jesse shows how she views the photos using her phone, and Lee admits that out of 30 photos, she usually gets only one good one. Then she acknowledges Jesse's photo of a dying soldier as excellent. At night, they rest by the fires, and in the morning, they continue through the ruined, smoldering country. Soon they enter a town untouched by the war. The people don't seem to understand where they are, creating the impression that they are traveling through time. The group enters a clothing store, where the saleswoman offers them to try on anything they like, and says they simply agreed to ignore the war because it wasn't their concern. Jesse asks Lee to try on a dress and photographs her. They relax, pretending that peaceful life has returned. However, upon exiting, Sammy points out the armed men on the roof, the price of tranquility. The group continues. Sammy reminds them of the fates of Gaddafi, Mussolini, and Ceausescu. None of them could say anything in the end, so Joel's hopes for a coherent interview with the president are futile. Suddenly, they see ahead an amusement park with a dead soldier lying in the middle. As the car moves slowly, a shot rings out. The journalists take cover behind a building where two soldiers are already hiding. It turns out there's a sniper ahead, shooting anyone who drives by. The soldiers casually admit they don't know who the shooter is. They'll kill him because he fired first. While the soldiers deal with the problem, Lee simply lies on the grass, admiring the flowers. Finally, the sniper clears the way. The journalists continue. But on a forest road, Lee notices a car following them. She decides to slow down and let it pass. But when it catches up, it turns out to be their colleagues, reporters from Hong Kong. One of them moves to Lee's car while driving. Then Jesse, deciding to mimic his action, goes to the Chinese journalist's car. The pair pull ahead of Lee's car. After discussing their affairs, the journalists suddenly notice the colleague's car has disappeared from the road. Lee starts to worry. Soon they reach a farm and see the Chinese journalist's empty car ahead. The girl and the journalist are held at gunpoint by some guys in camouflage. Lee manages to break, and they haven't been noticed yet. They observe the soldiers loading numerous civilian bodies into a pit. They realize these are criminals, as there is no regular army in the area. Lee asks Sammy to stay while they approach the soldiers. Joel explains they are journalists just passing by, but the guy in camouflage suddenly shoots one of the Chinese journalists and then starts questioning them. Realizing they are from the Central States of America, he calmly kills the second Chinese journalist. It becomes clear he intends to kill them all. Suddenly, Sam's car rushes onto the road, hitting the bandit, but Jesse flies straight into the mass grave. The girl comes to her senses atop the pile of bodies and crawls out. Joel manages to grab her, and they jump into the car as Sammy floors it. The awakened soldiers shoot at them, but the car drives away. Jesse and Joel scream from the trauma they just experienced. But after calming down a bit, they discover Sammy is wounded. They move the old man to the back seat and rush onward. Night falls as the car drives through a burning forest. The people are mesmerized by the flaming trees on either side of the road and the flying ash. In the morning, they reach a military camp of the Western forces and realize that Sammy has quietly died. They meet with their colleagues and learn that the government troops have practically surrendered. Their dream is unlikely to come true. The capital is defended by the last remnants of stubborn soldiers and the remnants of the secret services. So Lee and Joel are late. There will be no story, and Sammy died in vain. Later, Lee refutes Joel's statement. Sammy always wanted to die not from some disease, so this isn't the worst outcome. The Western forces head to Washington. Lee cleans Sammy's blood from the car, and they follow. At night, the journalists reach the White House and film everything happening around. A real battle erupts on the city's streets. Lee and Jesse capture the soldiers' faces, their courage, and their death. They follow a group that clears roadblocks and breaks through to the president's residence. The Western forces reach the White House and surround it. One of the colleagues tells Joel that the victors are landing on the Congress building from helicopters, so it will all end soon. The president is definitely in the White House and will be killed for sure. Suddenly, the president's motorcade departs from the building, chased by soldiers. They stop and shoot the official cars. And then Lee suddenly says the president is not there and leads her group to the White House. Noticing this, a detachment of soldiers follows them. The journalists enter. Bodies of the dead lie in the foyer. Everything around is broken and scattered, but no living people are visible. The soldiers ask not to get underfoot, and the journalists obediently follow the people, who start searching the White House more thoroughly. Soon they reach the press conference room, where a female negotiator meets them. She asks for guarantees of the president's life, after which she promises to escort them to him. But the soldiers simply shoot her and move on. A battle with the president's guard breaks out in the building's corridors. Lee is horrified by what is happening and takes almost no photos, unlike Jesse, who gradually loses sensitivity, chasing every new shootout. At one point, the girl loses her vigilance and runs into the middle of the corridor. Lee sees a soldier across the way raising his weapon, rushes forward, knocks Jesse down, and covers her with her body. Lying on the floor, Jesse films the last moments of her mentor's life as she falls nearby after being shot in the back. But even after this, the girl gets up and follows Joel, who runs towards the Oval Office, where the soldiers finally capture the president. He stops the execution and tries to ask the politician who ruined his country a question. But the president only begs not to be killed. The soldiers shoot him, and Jesse photographs the last seconds of the US president's life. Then she captures for history the smiling Western soldiers against the backdrop of the politician's body, a terrifying picture.